So I've given a number of talks about this subject, but it's one that always excites interest. It's about sex. So who's not interested? Well, and who am I to be talking about that? You know, I'm a former monk and a celibate priest, so what do I know? So you'll have to help me with this from your own experience as well. But part of that experience does give me a perspective, you know, on certain aspects which are important. Now, one reason I bring it up now again is this past weekend we had the reading about love in the Catholic liturgy, you know, from Corinthians 13, and part of my homily, which you can now find online, both in written and in video form, has to do with sexual love and the way we haven't appreciated it, the way we've repressed and suppressed and sanctioned and penalized and lent people all sorts of guilt and shame about it, which doesn't do anybody any good in terms of how we actually should be integrating those powerful forces. So there's been a lot of dysfunction and a lot of disservice done to people within most religious traditions, actually. So it'd be good to get a closer, fuller picture of it, more balanced picture if we can. It also refers back to a homily I gave on the same Sunday, on the same readings 18 years ago at St. Joseph's in the Village, which is also be online for you, which I went into that even more. So it's always a topical subject. What I haven't covered in previous talks, I've noticed, is Tantrism, the Tantric tradition from Hindu and the Buddhist tradition, and how that fits in to illuminate, you know, what's possible and desirable in this whole area. So I want to kind of base my talk on that today, and I'll come back to that theme, you know, and how we should see how that integrates or can integrate everything from that particular perspective. Now, what we're aiming at in life, and certainly in our spiritual practice, is something that is described pretty well here, among many other places, I'm sure, in the Conversations with God, Book 3. He says, you know, the use of physical pleasure as an avenue to remembering who you are is achieved by raising up through the body the basic energy of all life. And this goes back to Kundalini, the kind of thing that you've heard about, I'm sure, where you're raising the energy and sublimating it and integrating it in that way. It says, this is the energy which you sometimes call sexual energy. It is raised up along the inner column of your being, you know, if you know the metaphysics, until it reaches the area called the third eye, and actually beyond that, to the crown. The area just behind the forehead, between and slightly above the eyes. And as you raise the energy, you cause it to course through all your body. It's like an inner orgasm, he says. So it's a higher kind, just as like there's a higher inner breathing, according to yoga, and there's a higher circulation and a higher metabolism, nourishment so there's also a higher sexual energy, you know, that's experienced through this. He says you think it up. I mean, it's the inner pathway of what you call your chakras. Once the energy is raised up repeatedly, one acquires a taste for this experience, just as one acquires a hunger for sex. So the whole experience, the whole appetite, the whole emphasis is on this higher experience, which has integrated those energies and, you know, brought them up and integrated with the spiritual. This is what yoga means. It means yoking the higher and the lower. It's the whole dance of life, the whole circulation of energy. You know, that's what it's all for. That's what it's all about. You know, in any tradition, you know, if you get into it. Religion itself means binding back, so same as yoga, yoking back. You're trying to integrate the higher and the lower, or the relative and the absolute, etc., in this particular fashion. And tantra is a Sanskrit word which has kind of a double interrelated meaning. One which means to stretch, and the other meaning to weave. So it has the same kind of idea. You're weaving together in your experience these different dimensions of energy, which is all interconnected, of course. And it's a stretch. you're stretching the energy, you're stretching yourself, to allow this to happen. And the point is that all the energy is connected. Whether the highest and the lowest are all interconnected. The emptiness is form, and form is emptiness in Zen terms. It's already there. It's already accomplished. It's already basically connected. It's just a matter of unifying it in our conscious, waking up to it, and unifying it in our being and our consciousness, which ultimately are the same. With that, and the very fact that mystical states, including the Judeo-Christian tradition, but in the Hindu tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, are described in sexual terms or pictured in sexual terms. The marriage of Christ in the church, the Song of Songs, the Samantabhadra, Samantabhadri. It shows that there's an awareness of the basic unity of these different connection of these energies. And those realities as image can actually be a help to our integrating it. But what actually happens, so he says the experience of the energy being raised is very sublime. It quickly becomes the experience most desired. So you really do shift your whole emphasis, your whole consciousness to this new level. Yet he says very wisely, you never completely lose your hunger for the lowering of the energy, for the basic passion, nor ought you to try. For the higher cannot exist without the lower in your experience. Once you get to the higher, you go back to the lower, you go back to the higher. That's the circulation, that's the energy, that's the dance. So no part of it is shameful, no part of it is low. It's all good if you allow it to follow its own dynamic. It says the sacred rhythm of all life. You do this not only by moving the energy around inside your body, you also do this by moving around the larger energy inside the body of God. Put it that way. Krishna or whatever, Christ. Now, the way that's most often been done, the way it's been presented, well, not so much in Hinduism, but certainly in Buddhism and certainly in Christianity, is through celibacy, through monasticism, through abstinence. And it's almost as if, this is so powerful and this is so consuming that if I'm going to sublimate it, I've got to kind of separate, and concentrate exclusively on this. That's why, this is a largely monastic culture that developed this kind of experience in Buddhism and even in Christianity. That's it's understandable, but it's not always the healthiest thing to do. Some people have a call to that. Some people just are not really naturally very sexual. There are people like that, and there are people I've met them both in my Catholic order and in another Catholic order. I've met a couple of people who had such powerful energy, bodily sexual energy, that they could not integrate it in their daily life, and they had to become monks, in order just for them to keep their sanity. I found genuine examples of that. So that's a way it can work in some people's lives. But as I said, there's been so much dysfunction, and I've seen so much dysfunction, of people who haven't really integrated it in this way. They've kind of repressed all that and tried to super spiritualize it, which does not work because all this energy is connected, and all of it is meant to be connected. It's all meant to function together. And there are, as I say, various ways of doing it. Monasticism is one way. And sometimes you have to look around to find other ways. For example, I haven't seen all the koans, but of the hundreds of koans I've seen, there are none about sex. I mean, there are a couple of stories of monks not supposed to look at women as they walk along, and the story of a monk carrying a woman on his shoulders across a flooded river, and his companion saying, you, look at what you've done. You've been faithless to your vows. And the other guy says, you're the one who's still carrying her. So there are a couple of stories, but there actually are no koans about, certainly no koans about being enlightened through sex. Certainly not. But that's what Tantra is about. So that's really interesting. So let's look at some of the ways, people's experience and the way it's presented. Now, Brad Warner, in his book about Zen, Sex, and Sin, says that most of the time when you come across workshops on tantrism, and working with sex, it's BS. I mean, it's not the thing at all. They're just getting their rocks off. At most, it's saying sexual experience can be a wonderful way of, if it's done, even with the following its own logic, can be a way of transcending yourself. It can be a real moment of really being in the moment, But it's just at its own level. And remember, it's all connected. It's kind of like a foretaste or a way of thinking, wow, if this is what it is, I mean, what else is possible, So we shouldn't disesteem it, but that's not what we mean by tantrism. It's a way of saying, well, wow, that's almost a taste of God. Well, it can be, and it's on its own way. So you shouldn't spurn it, but you shouldn't mistake it either for, like the ultimate thing. Same thing with about falling in love. People like Eckhart Tolle speak about that in his book, The Power of Now, and Christian de la Huerta also. Falling in love can be a sublime experience. It can be, wow, like the whole world is transfigured. It doesn't last, and especially if the ego grasps onto it as a way of fulfilling itself or finding the ultimate thing, you're going to be in trouble. Because once again, it's just kind of meant like a little foretaste of something that's possible. But too often, especially when young people are falling in love, they're falling in love with someone who's going to complete them or fill in the blanks of what they don't have, what they haven't worked through in themselves, and then there's disappointment and hatred and frustration and jealousy and all this other stuff which comes in. To the extent that, and as soon as the ego becomes involved and tries to find there a fulfillment which you can't find, which is what often happens, then you're in trouble. But if you don't cling to it, and you see it as just kind of a taste, a foretaste of something, then it can be fine. I like what Richard Rohr said in his book on the Holy Grail, when he said, when a young man is on the spiritual path and then meets the woman he's going to marry, or the woman he does marry, that can be a big problem mistake too. Because you think, wow, she's the Holy Grail. Well, news, she's not. She can be your companion to find the Holy Grail. And she's finding it herself. And you can help her, and she can help you. And that's kind of an ideal relationship, when you're both on the spiritual path. But the spiritual path is higher than that. It's not each other. You can be the vehicle, the symbol, the companion for each other on the path. But it's not the Holy Grail. It's not the ultimate experience as such. So that's getting us, you for example, in the Christian tradition, when you say, the marriage of a man and woman is Christ in the church, and you can experience that in the union, or in a broader sense, when two people really do love each other selflessly, the union they experience in or out of sex is really sublime and really spiritual, because love is all there is. Love is what it's all about, ultimately, in the cosmic tense. So that's getting pretty high. And yet that's still not what we mean by tantrism. We're still getting we're getting higher there. But it's not exactly what we're talking about here as a technique. So what are we talking about? Well, I remember Ram Dass said in his famous book, Be Here Now, in one of the appendices, he's talking about this, and he says, not I, and no one in my acquaintance has ever really done this. So just know that. I would probably say that the number of people who are capable on this planet right now of actual tantric sex is probably on one hand, you can number it at most. So, as it says on the TV, sometimes do not try at home. Okay, but you can be on your journey. It's good to know that there's a possibility. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, well, not just the love or the union or the respect, but the actual sexual act is an experience of the absolute, of God, and of non-duality. Not just with each other, but with God. Two becoming one flesh, but the body of God. Or whatever you want to call it, the absolute, Vishnu, or that's what we're talking about. And that's really, really rare. But it's possible.
I was warned by my teacher, if ego is terribly involved,
No, there can't be any ego
you
here.
could go down.
Oh, absolutely. There's no ego here. That's the whole point.
Yes.
That's why it's so rare. There's absolutely no ego. Ego's disappeared. It's the absolute, union with the absolute, non-duality, your true self. So it's really interesting here. I came to this realization just thinking about this, and I've never read it anywhere, but I think it's important. When this happens, with a partner, say, it's not that the absolute is, or even just, it's not that the absolute is there and you're the relative. No. You're the absolute and the relative at the same time. So it's not that Christ is there and you're the church here, or your wife is, or whatever. You're Christ. And everything else at the same time, the whole universe. So just as you have to, as Jung says, you have to find, and this is true for any relationship to succeed, if you want to go back down on those different levels here, you have to find the masculine feminine balance in yourself and not be looking for it in another person. Same is true, you have to find the balance, the absolute relative in yourself as well. So you're the whole thing. Samantabhadra and Samantabhadri. You're this Rama, Krishna, and the Dayinis, whatever they're called. You're both at the same time, and so is whatever partner you're dealing with. So that should open up a few things about gender and homosexuality and everything else, by the way. So it's really important to realize that each of you or all of you are one, everything at the same time, through that. And just a caution here, of course, as many people have pointed out, and it's happening again in the community now with a certain rabbi. Zen communities and other communities are full of examples, and I've spoken about this before, of people who've gone off the rails sexually, teachers who have been abusing, students, etc. You can see how it happens. I'm the whole. I'm everything, and we've got this, sexual connection with the whole universe. We're talking about the inner orgasm, and wow, so I can do it with everybody. Well, no.
That's ego.
That's the ego, right? Exactly. As soon as you come down from the consciousness, then you're in trouble if you don't know how to handle it, because it's ego inflation, what Jung calls it, ego inflation, megalomania. And unless you're really healthy psychologically and spiritually, and have a good moral theology or moral philosophy, unless you have all those things, you're going to wreak havoc, because you're going to fall into the trap. So it's really, really dangerous. As if you didn't already know that, from what I've been saying. So this is a really tricky subject, of course, but really, really powerful. And I hope I've outlined some of the different levels of awareness and some of the different pitfalls along the way, and what we really mean by the tantric experience, rare as it is, that it's actually possible to have that degree of unified experience beyond ego, with or without a partner. So, any any comments or questions? We have a few minutes.
I'm thinking of Teresa of Avila and certain mystics, their ecstatic experiences.
Yeah, and you see the Bernini statue is pictured as like an orgasmic thing. And even John of the Cross, by the way, speaks about This is one level of it. You know, when you have a deep spiritual experience of union with God, you can actually have like a sexual reaction in your body. So that shows the connection, but also the disconnect. You know, that it's not yet fully integrated. It's interesting. So even Christian mystics speak about that, but generally the conclusion they draw is, you know, within the framework of the whole thing that we learned, you know, about the higher and the lower, you know, this is bad and this is good, so it's not exactly healthy, but it does testify to the connection of the energies. So let's sit for a few minutes before we do the vows, if you dare.